All right, as I said, I hope everyone's having a good morning, got some coffee, some food, went to the bathroom. So we're gonna begin, I guess, our second leg. I wanna introduce Kim Anderson. She is the director of the Office of Equal Opportunity, and she's gonna talk to you about Title IX.
Hello. I am here to talk to you about Title IX and talk to you a little bit about sort of broadly the Office for Equal Opportunity as well. Not the most exciting topic, I know, but it's actually really important and will have a lot of impacts on you potentially as students, but also in your future careers, whatever they may be. So hopefully we can get through all of this and you can retain this information. So objectives, as I mentioned, in your role as students, you have certain rights as students at WSU that we want you to be aware of, and there are resources available for you. As I think Dr. McIntyre was mentioning, a lot of you will also be becoming teaching assistants and research assistants, et cetera, and with that comes some additional responsibilities, so we want you to know about those. And a lot of those responsibilities will carry over into your career as faculty members or even as you go out into the professional market. These issues permeate our society, and so it's important for you to be aware of them. So during this conversation, I'm going to talk a little bit about some issues that are sensitive for some people, talking a little bit about some issues that may cause trauma, and so I want you to be aware of some resources available to you, including our counseling and psychological services on campus and health and wellness services. We also have a really wonderful group in our community called Alternatives to Violence of the Palouse. They are a confidential resource for anybody who's experienced sex or gender-based violence, and so we want you to know about those resources. Use them for yourself. Know that they're there. If you have a friend who is in need, I encourage you to share those resources with them. You can find, I'll talk a little bit more about some of these resources throughout, but also you can find all of this information on our website, which is just oeo.wsu.edu. We have resources for every campus. So these community resources are specific to Pullman, but we do have a similar list of resources for every campus on our website. So, Title IX. This is an interesting topic. It's one that's been evolving. Obviously, Title IX is from 1972, traditionally understood to apply to athletics. In recent years, we've been interpreting it more broadly as applying to all forms of discrimination on the basis of sex in education. With this, we've seen a dramatic focus from the media, from the federal government, and really within our student population, talking about what effect sex and gender-based violence has on someone during their educational pursuits. And I can speak just from experience of working with students who've experienced this, and it has a tremendous effect. And so it's important that we prevent it from happening, and when it does happen, that we have resources available to support students. So just briefly, a little context. Washington State is somewhat unique. The university was founded only shortly after Washington became a state. And actually, in Washington, women were given the right to vote in 1910, which is 10 years before that was a federal mandate. Sad that didn't happen until 1920, but in 1972, then we got the Title IX amendments to the education amendments, and again, this was pivotal. Prior to Title IX, the number of women participating in all forms of college, university activities was significantly lower than the number of men. We're almost at parity in undergraduate and graduate education. Where we don't see parity still is in our faculty representation. And so part of this for you is to think more critically about why that is, to become more involved in mentoring or engaging with your mentors, but also thinking about how we can create an environment that is safer for everyone on the basis of sex or gender, and where everyone feels they have equal opportunity to participate. So we have some specific policies that apply here at WSU, as well as, again, there are of course federal and state regulations that apply. The WSU policy prohibiting discrimination, sexual harassment, and sexual misconduct, that's Executive Policy 15. That's the policy that is managed by my office, the Office for Equal Opportunity. That policy cross-references with the standards of conduct for students, which apply to all of you, even as graduate students. You're subject to the standards of conduct for students. Now, that's a broad list of requirements, and I believe someone will be talking with you a little bit more about that later, but it covers academic integrity to intimate partner violence to sexual assault. And so those definitions of the sex and gender-based violence, they cross-reference with EP 15. Also want to just a kind of a short note about EP 28, which is the policy on faculty, student, and supervisor-subordinate relationships. Talk a little bit about that later. That policy is technically governed by Human Resource Services, but it has some relevance to your experiences here. So EP 15 prohibits discrimination on the basis of pretty much every defined protected class. Washington State has been kind of ahead of the curve regularly. We've added sexual orientation before it was a state or a federal mandate. We're ahead of the curve with all of these, but for the most part now, the federal government has caught up with us. So we like to think that we're trend setting. So I'm going to focus specifically on sex and gender and sexual orientation and gender identity expression under Title IX, but I also want you to know that OEO, the Office for Equal Opportunity, is responsible for investigating and addressing all forms of discrimination. So we are a resource for you. If you've experienced any form of discrimination as a student or in your employee relationships, but we also want you to know that it does apply to you as well. So if you engage in discrimination, you could be subject to an investigation by the Office for Equal Opportunity. Of course, this policy applies to students, faculty, staff, even visitors to campus. I report directly to the president. That's intentional so that I can investigate, my office can investigate anyone at the institution below the president. So no one is immune or impervious to these concerns. And so no matter how high it goes, we want you to know that there are support systems available for you. So just really roughly going to introduce you to what discrimination is. There's sort of three main forms of discrimination. Disparate treatment is essentially intentionally treating individuals differently on the basis of their protected membership in a protected category. To be clear, everybody in this room is a member of multiple protected categories. You all have a sex, you all have a gender, you all have a race, you all have a religion, be it the absence of religion. Everyone is protected under these categories. So you can all experience discrimination, and so therefore we are a resource for every one of you in this room. Disparate impact is generally a policy that's neutral, but has a different impact on members of certain protected categories. So again, just wanting you to be familiar sort of with these, that these are possible areas where you may have experiences, and that, again, we're a resource. Harassment is where we see most of our sex and gender-based concerns. It's a form or a pattern of conduct that's directed at an individual that unreasonably interferes with their work or educational pursuits. The standard we apply is severe, persistent, or pervasive. You'll hear that throughout. That's an important standard because essentially it means that while people can be rude, they can engage in inappropriate conduct. If it doesn't rise to the level of severe, persistent, or pervasive, we're not able to address it under a policy. However, it doesn't mean that we can't work with faculty and staff to increase education available, to talk about climate and culture, but we want to be really clear that the standard is a relatively I want to say not high standard, but it's important that we meet that standard if we're looking at discrimination. So as I mentioned, sexual harassment is a form of discrimination on the basis of sex or gender. And again, that severe, persistent, or pervasive is the standard we're applying. There's a number of ways that someone could experience sexual harassment. Some of the sort of more commonly known would be quid pro quo harassment, which means this for that. So say you have a faculty member who promises a student an A in a course if they go on a date with them. That would be this for that, quid pro quo harassment, pretty easy to document. We look at some of the other forms of conduct, comments, questions, jokes that are inappropriate. We may have to look at kind of more of the behavior to determine whether it's severe, persistent, or pervasive. But again, we encourage you, if you feel that you may be experiencing some form of discrimination, to contact us. Early on, we can talk about how to prevent it. We can potentially intervene and try to address it before it becomes worse. If it's an ongoing concern and a faculty member, say, has been subjecting you to discrimination, that can result in termination and any other form of discipline from the university. I can tell you, probably on a yearly basis, at least one or two individuals at the faculty level lose their job as a result of it. We're working to address that and stop it from happening. We've got some pretty aggressive education programs that we're employing for faculty and staff, help them understand what our expectations are of them. But again, these policies are here to protect you, but they're also here to guide you in your own actions. So, sex and gender-based violence. Again, this is an area where we've seen a lot of increased focus, essentially since 2011 when we had the Dear Colleague letter, which came out from the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. This essentially sort of changed the focus or clarified that the focus needed to be not just on equity in athletics, but also on equity in the experience of individuals on the basis of sex or gender in the college environment. Actually, it applies to high schools and grade schools as well, but there's not as much focus there yet. So when we talk about this, we look at non-consensual sexual contact, which of course includes sexual assault or rape, sexual exploitation, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. Why these issues are important? The numbers are astronomical. People are experiencing sexual assault. They say that 1 in 5 women and 1 in 16 college men experience completed or attempted sexual assault during their college career. Of course, the numbers can vary depending on how the survey was conducted, but either way you cut it, that's a ridiculously high number, and we need to find a way to stop that from happening. Of course, that's not just going to happen at the college level or even at the high school level. It needs to be a cultural shift, but we're here to sort of set the standard and again, want to communicate to you that regardless of your culture, your background, your experiences, your beliefs, these standards are applied at WSU, and there is support and assistance for you, and also, again, enforcement of these standards. So, as I mentioned, 2011 was kind of a major shift in addressing sexual violence. This is just more anecdotally from the Office for Equal Opportunity. You see the light blue bar at the very bottom of this graph. That represents complaints on the basis of sex or gender, and you can see that those have dramatically increased to OEO over the last 4 or 5 years. And part of that, again, I see that as a good thing. Our goal is to have you know that we are a resource that you can raise these concerns and that we will address them. You may hear it talk about Clery and Clery statistics reporting with some different interpretations of that. You can understand that high numbers indicate that a campus is not safe, or I think more accurately, high numbers indicate that the student body is empowered and knows that they can file a complaint and raise a concern if they're experiencing sexual violence. Again, those numbers, that 1 in 5 and 1 in 16, that's a national standard. So this is happening across the country. So one of the things we want to talk to you about is what does consent look like? Consent is necessary before engaging in any form of sexual contact. Again, this is a standard that has evolved over time, but this is becoming the standard expectation in society, is that consent is affirmative. It's clear, knowing, and voluntary. So that means that someone who is incapacitated due to alcohol, drugs, whatever it is that renders them incapable of understanding the who, what, where, when, why, and how of an action, if they are incapacitated, they cannot give consent. And so, you know, this is a major issue on college campuses, obviously, when we're looking at students who are out and drinking and partying, and sexual contact occurs. We're often looking at whether consent was present, and that's a hard thing to do. But we have some very well-trained investigators who spend a lot of time and care in assessing that. And essentially, my advice to anyone who's looking to engage in sexual contact with someone is be sure that they want to do that. And if you're not absolutely certain that in the next day that they're going to feel the same, I would wait and you know, essentially be sure that the person that you're engaging in sexual contact with wants to be there with you, and knows that they're there with you. It seems simple to put it into words, but it can be very complex. And again, I encourage you to be thoughtful about that. In your role potentially as graduate teaching assistants or research assistants, you may have a level of supervision over students, and I want you to remember these definitions, because you may have an obligation to report to the university if you learn of these concerns. So this isn't just about you knowing what your rights are, it's about you knowing what your obligations are as well. So some of the other forms of sexual violence, as I mentioned, stalking, relationship violence, intimate partner violence is kind of different terms applied to relationship violence. Sometimes that's dating violence. We actually see, I would say, within graduate programs, a higher rate of intimate partner violence than sexual violence. And so again, be thinking about this in your interactions, and be aware that there are resources for support. I won't read these to you. There are some additional trainings available on our website, which I will highlight later, that I would encourage you to consider taking. They're relatively brief and can be very useful tools for you. So one important thing to note, and I talked about sexual violence, the university will address and has a process to address sexual violence when it occurs, when it has the potential to impact someone's educational pursuits. That process is separate and distinct from the criminal process. We have a different standard of proof, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and we have different rules of evidence. So regardless of where the conduct occurs, whether it's on campus or off, if it has the potential to come onto campus, we will address it. And here's where the employee reporting obligations come in. You, as students, if you share with a faculty member that you have experienced sexual violence, their obligation is to report that to me as the Title IX coordinator or to my office. And so we want you to know that. There are confidential resources that you can speak with if you don't want it reported to my office. If it is reported to my office, what happens is we would essentially reach out to you with resources. You get to determine whether you speak to us or not. We want to be very respectful of you and your privacy, and so we'll guard that information carefully. But we do have an obligation to ensure that you know what resources are available to you. As an employee, again, if you become a TA or anyone with a supervisory role over other students, you have that same reporting obligation. So if a student reports to you that they have experienced sexual violence, be it verbally or even in an essay where they mention that they've experienced this and that's why they were delayed in turning in their work, or that has impacted them, we want you to report that to us. Again, we're going to reach out to them with resources, let them know that the university is here to support and care, and if they don't want to talk to us, they're never required to do so. A key to this too is when you do learn, if you do learn of sexual violence, is we don't want you to investigate it yourself. We don't want you to try to assess the allegations. We don't want you to try to fix it. Our investigators are trained to handle and to receive this information in a way that doesn't cause additional trauma. It's not your job to determine whether or not it's a legitimate complaint. We treat every complaint as legitimate. And again, the investigators in my office are well trained to understand the impacts and why someone in their reporting may not seem consistent with what your expectations are of someone who's experienced trauma. And it's important to know that there's not really any one way that someone should react to trauma. But there's a potential that if you ask questions or start to dig, that could cause additional trauma. So we want you to be very careful with that. As I mentioned previously, we have quite a number of different trainings available on our website. There's just a tab at oeo.wsu.edu for training. These are online, and there's no login required to complete them at present. They're relatively brief, no longer than 20 minutes. There are written transcripts so that you can print them and keep that information. A number of departments are now asking certainly graduate TAs to take these trainings, and there is a certificate at the end that you can print out and provide to your department. That can be beneficial for you, just to keep that in case they do have that requirement. But certainly beneficial for you to have this information going forward so you can be successful in any sort of teaching pursuits, but certainly any other professional pursuits as well. I want to highlight a couple additional trainings that we have available. Green Dot training is offered through our violence prevention programs, which is through Health and Wellness Services. This is a bystander intervention training. All incoming undergraduate students are receiving a short introduction to bystander intervention and then are given the opportunity to take the longer training. Any of you who would like to take the Green Dot training are encouraged to do so. It really is, I think, beneficial in encouraging you to think about your role and your interactions with others. But it's also, it can be a resume builder if nothing else. If you're looking at, again, pursuing any sort of academic career, having familiarity with that can be beneficial. I also encourage you to think about taking the Ally training, which is offered through our Gender Identity Expression and Sexual Orientation Resource Center. That's a long name, so we call them GSORC. Again, they regularly schedule the trainings, but you can also make a special request to participate in a training, have them come and provide a training to your department. This has been really beneficial to, I think, even my office to think critically about the way we interact with others. Do we use gendered terms that may exclude someone or make someone feel like they have been left out of a conversation? Thinking critically about what terms someone chooses to use and being respectful of that. Misusing gender pronouns for someone can turn off the conversation, and it can be an unnecessary barrier to your interactions with someone. And so again, another opportunity to increase your understanding of those around you, but also, if nothing else, looks good on your resume. And I'm not trying to minimize that. It's actually a really great training that my office has done, but it's also a great way for you to expand your knowledge. So, as I mentioned, if someone reports that they've experienced sex or gender-based violence, we do have a number of resources on campus. Again, these resources are talking specifically about the Pullman campus. We have the same or similar resources available for every single campus. And so confidential resources are those resources that do not have an obligation to report to me. And actually, when we use the term confidential, this is legally privileged. So if, for some reason, there is a court action or a legal action later on down the road, these people have protection from providing that information, which is a very high standard. It's something that's recognized in the law. So university resources, while we will guard the information as carefully as possible and will not unnecessarily disseminate it, we don't have that same legal protection. And so I always want to make that distinction so you understand where your rights lie. But again, university resources, the Dean of Students does not just serve undergraduate students as maybe some people perceive. This is available for you as graduate students as well, but you also have the graduate school, which offers a number of support resources as well. If someone is experiencing sexual violence or has experienced it, we can look at changing classroom assignments. We can look at changing living assignments. There's a number of other additional forms of support available. Our goal is to create an environment where they are safe and feel comfortable continuing to pursue their education. And so, again, the options are endless. We can be creative and come up with some different forms of support that we haven't used before. Student Standards and Accountability is the office that really enforces violations of EP 15 and the standards of conduct for students among students. And so you can file a complaint with the Office of Student Standards and Accountability if you feel someone is harassing you for reasons not related to sex or gender or race or ethnicity. If it's not based on a protected class, they're here as a resource. You can also contact them if you feel you're experiencing discrimination, and they will refer you to work with OEO. As I mentioned, on our website, we do have a tab with resources for every campus, including Global Campus, which, yes, is shown in the tab to the side. And again, I encourage you to visit those and be familiar with those, whether in your form as students or as potential employees at the university. So what can students expect? We always emphasize that whatever process comes after we learn of sex and gender-based violence is care-driven. We have resources available for all students, so this isn't just someone who files a complaint. It's also someone who is accused of engaging in misconduct. We do have resources available for everyone. This is a neutral process. There's no predetermined outcome, and we pride ourselves on a fair and equitable process. Again, I mentioned trauma-informed. That's kind of a buzzword du jour, but it is important that we acknowledge the impacts of sexual violence on an individual. This trauma can be life-altering and lasts an entire lifetime, obviously. So we want to make sure that we're not causing additional harm in our processes. Really quickly, just going to run through the investigative process with you. Once we receive a complaint of discrimination, we extend resources. If the individual is interested in talking with us, we would invite them in for an interview. This is really a conversation. It's not like some of what you would see on TV as an interrogation or something. It's much more casual and intended to be as comfortable as possible. If they are interested in an investigation and if the conduct rises to the level where it could be a violation, we would issue notice to the alleged perpetrator. They're informed then of their rights, of the support and resources available for them. And then ultimately, we would conduct the investigation, review documents, interview witnesses. We apply the standard of preponderance of the evidence. So this is where you'll see the difference between the criminal process and our process. WSU, when we're looking at sex and gender-based violence and determining whether it's a policy violation, it's solely for the purposes of the university. We don't have the authority to put someone in jail. We don't have the authority to fine them. We really only have the authority to determine whether or not they're worthy of being members of our community. And we expect members of the university community to be respectful and to not discriminate against others. So again, we apply that preponderance of the evidence standard. It's also based on whether the conduct is, as I mentioned before, severe, persistent, or pervasive. Ultimately, the Office of Student Conduct has the authority, is the only office with the authority to sanction students, and they, in cases involving sexual violence, would most likely convene a student conduct board, which is, the student conduct board is the only body at the university that has the authority to suspend or expel students. So there's a significant amount of process that comes before any action like that is taken against a student. They have a number of rights and support options, but it is ultimately, that can be the outcome if someone is engaging in sexual violence. It is, I would say, close to double digits of undergraduate students who are suspended or expelled each year for having engaged in sexual violence. And again, if you think of that 1 in 5 standard, that really indicates that we're just scraping the tip of the iceberg. Does anybody have any questions about that? I know it's kind of hard to do in this room, but okay. If you have any questions about any of this, please don't hesitate to contact my office. Any of the investigators and myself can talk with you about this process, about any of the other processes available, and support options. So under these policies, retaliation is strictly prohibited. This is one thing that we always emphasize. Students often, if they're have a concern with a faculty member who has some level of sway over their future career pursuits, we will work with them to determine how to investigate in a way that hopefully will minimize the impact on their career. We can't necessarily guarantee it, and I never make promises that I can't be sure I keep, but we will work, and we take these very seriously. And so we don't want anyone to avoid or to not come speak with us because they're concerned about this. So again, great deal of care and customized to the needs of the individual. As I mentioned before, Executive Policy 28 is technically a human resource services policy, but I want to talk with you because it does have a couple different implications for you. Under EP 28, relationships with faculty members or with students, between faculty and students, or between supervisors and subordinates are not expressly prohibited. They're certainly discouraged. And the one thing that is which is prohibited is that the reporting relationship or the power imbalance cannot remain. So if for some reason a faculty member has to enter into a relationship with a student, they cannot continue to grade that student. They cannot continue to have authority over that student. This is important because that power imbalance can come into play. Sometimes we find that a relationship that one person thinks is consensual may be less so because of that power imbalance. And so we do have a number of cases each year involving teaching assistants and undergraduates. So if you, in your role as a teaching assistant, decide that you must enter into a relationship with an undergraduate student, you need to let your supervisor know immediately. You need to make sure that you don't continue to have authority or influence over that individual. This also applies if, for some reason, you decide to enter into a relationship with a faculty member. You have rights there. They cannot be supervising you. They won't be disciplined if they disclose it right away, but if they don't disclose it or if they continue to maintain that level of supervision or authority over you, that could be a violation of policy. So key with this is disclose so that the university can be sure to remove that power imbalance. Want you to know about some additional individuals who can assist if you have questions about Title IX. Dr. Melinda Husky is our Interim Vice President for Student Affairs and Dean of Students. Her office is located in the French Administration Building on the first floor. Ann McCoy is the Associate Director of Athletics. Typically, she's dealing with cases involving athletes. She's referring those to us, but she can offer level of support, and anyone can report to her if they have a concern. We also have Title IX liaisons on each campus, and for the list of liaisons, you can visit the OEO website. While I have just a few remaining minutes, I want to talk to you a little bit about my responsibility as the ADA coordinator as well. So ADA deals with students with disabilities, and this is another area where I would encourage you to explore your rights and also your responsibilities. Again, there is a training on our website specifically targeted for graduate students that talks about Title IX reporting obligations as well as obligations relating to serving students who have disabilities. If a student approaches you and requires an accommodation, the biggest goal here is to have you engage with them respectfully and not assert your own opinion about the disability, but to be sure that you connect them with the appropriate resources and connect with your supervisors if you have questions. And one last final note, if you are a student with a disability, I encourage you to use the resources and avail yourself of the Access Center, of resources through the graduate school. These are important and trying times for you, and you really are entitled to accommodations, and so you should take advantage of those if you see fit. All right, that is all I have for you. Again, as I mentioned, please don't hesitate to call or email my office if you have any questions. Visit our website, and thank you for your attention. Good luck this year.